Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Beth Burke, and today I've got John Niland with me to have an amazing conversation about how to be valued for who we really are in our work. We are in this moment right now that is the Great Resignation, and I like to call it the Great Reinvention because people are starting to rethink, who am I? What do I want to become? Why am I doing this job? I'm ready to move on. So, as value and belief systems about what we need in our work is changing, that is changing our professional identity. And John is someone I found who's a very special expert in professional identity and self worth. And he has this fabulous book here called The Self Worth Safari that we'll unpack a little bit more. And just a quick note about my background. I have come into professional identity research because my own professional identity crises. I have struggled to figure out where I belong in the workforce, where I fit, how to be seen. And I've had a windy, zigzagging background. But eventually I found that there's an intersection between the different hats I wear. And I call that my hybrid professional identity. So I've been studying and researching how other people are more than the sum of their parts too. And so hybridity, I think, is a huge part we've been missing in the landscape of reinventing ourselves. And John and I have had many conversations about the new frontier of careers and how careers are not just keep going in a linear fashion, get promoted, get a new title, and boom, you make sense. Careers are so much more complex than that. And it's a lot of, do you know who you are so you can communicate your value and stand out? It's not just your skills and it's not just your old job titles. So, with that, I'm going to let John launch in and tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this work? John, I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for, thanks for the invite, Sarah Beth. I love that term you just used, the new frontiers, because I have been in the workforce for just over 4 decades. I started work in the summer of 1980. I think that's 4 decades. I always have to think, it's at the point where I have to do the math.
Yeah.
And by far, this is the most exciting one that I've seen. My original background was in systems in IT, and I was always a square peg in a round hole. I was not an easy fit into the systems world. Why did I do it? Because back in 1980, in my native Ireland, that's where the jobs were. I had 5 younger brothers. I was shortly about to get married, rather young in life, and I needed an income. So why did I go and do my first job? And that was the norm in the 1980s. You chose a career, probably or primarily, to be a provider, to fulfill your role in a family. And of course, things have changed enormously, and not just in one leap. We've seen over the course of the decades, we've seen quite a lot of changes around the millennium. 2 decades later, I left behind the IT world, having organized a management buyout of my company in order to break out, and that was primarily what it was about. It was about I'd built this edifice, but I forgot to put a door in it. And then I started into what was then a new career in coaching. And during that time, for at least a decade, I was a part of this, self-esteem coaching movement of, who do you want to be? You can anyone you want. And hell, it was exciting. You could be anyone you wanted. But along the way, I began to see the shadow sides of this self-esteem movement. Anxiety, the constant preoccupation of not living up to our full potential. I began to see in my coaching work the suffering this was causing. That no matter what level of success they got to, excuse me, they were always, painfully conscious that they weren't here wherever here was. And then in 2016, I had some of my own personal crises, which involved the ending of a relationship, that involved a setback at work, certain, political developments about which the less said, the better. And to make a long story short, by the end of that year, I really lost who I was myself. That's what gave rise to the book you mentioned earlier, which is this distinction between self-esteem and self-worth, which today underpins just about everything I do.
Well, here we both are. I think you and I have talked about how maybe I came from air and you came by sea, but we came to the same point about understanding there's something much bigger going on of transformation, transition, and figuring out your career path. And it is this element of who are you really? How are you more than a job title? And not finding your value through jobs and job titles. Because when people lose a job, they lose a sense of themselves. They lose their direction. They lose their self-esteem. And it doesn't need to be that way. And actually, the truth is, we invent our own career paths anyway. And these external forces are just part of the path, but they are not making us who we are. So that's a little bit of what you and I focus on so much. So why don't we just shift gears for a second and help people understand when we're talking about professional identity and the power of that, what do we mean? So, John, how do you define professional identity in your work?
I mean, there are many visuals to describe it, but the easy one that many relate to is it's the red line that runs through all of your roles and careers and everything to date. And as you put it in another conversation we had, it's about who you are rather than what you do. And I really relate to that because what happens, and if we look now at the world after the pandemic, a lot of people have lost the reference points that has defined their self-esteem. They may have lost a job, they may have lost a client base, they may have lost a whole channel. They may just have lost their desk at the office because of the reshuffle. It can be small things.
Yeah.
That very often denotes who we are.
Completely.
And when that happens, if there is no innate, unconditional, intrinsic self-worth, then it's very easy for the tree to be blown over in the storm because the roots don't go deep enough. And in the book, what I write about is the fact that our society privileges self-worth. A lot of development programs privilege self-esteem. Or a lot of development programs are tapping into our need for self-esteem. There's a marketplace here, and coaching is part of it.
So John, just to clarify for the audience, so professional identity, just in a simple sense, I think is how you see yourself, what you call yourself in your work. And then what I'm hearing your other part of the work here is self-worth in connection to professional identity, because they're connected. And I just want to make sure people understand that. So self-worth is the value, if I have this right, correct, help me out. Self-worth is the value that you intrinsically believe you have. It's not coming in from external forces, society, employers, coworkers. Is that right?
Yeah, the easiest way to see it is in the moment when you go out the door in the morning or log on to Zoom or Teams in the morning to do your day's work.
Yeah.
If one person does that in order to get their professional identity, in order to prove themselves to themselves, they're going to have a very different day to the person who already knows what their professional identity is and is going out to express their self-worth in whatever they do today. These two people are going to have it, even if the same events happen to them, they're going to have two dramatically different days. One of them is trying to get something rather intangible called self-esteem from what they're doing. The other, they may both have a professional identity, but the second one is clear about who they are already.
Yeah.
And therefore they're going out that day to be useful. They're going out that day to express that in some way in how they go to work in the marketplace.
Yes. I love it.
That's the shift that I live in.
It's major. I mean, I want to just underscore this for people because it is a revelation. I was never taught this. I don't think a lot of people know this information. And that's why it's literally the most transformational element anyone can do in their career is figure out who you are first. How do you understand your value, your professional identity, and walk into the world with that? Because if you're waiting for other people to give you a job, to give you an opportunity, and you're defining yourself through how they see you, what they tell you about yourself, all of these factors that are out of your control and can change in a moment, you never have your own orientation because it's all coming from outside in instead of inside out. So this is radical. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is the thing people need to know, and yet we're still barely talking about it.
Oh, it's even more adverse to some extent. We are living in a culture that's absolutely outside in.
Yeah.
The craving for ratings,
Yes. Yes.
the craving for following and attention on social media, the so-called customer service surveys,
Yeah.
which is never about the customer.
No.
It's always about the needy supplier who's
Yeah.
desperate for the feedback. And of course, I haven't even touched on education, have I?
I
Uh,
know.
we have in pretty much all walks of society, we are steeped in this self-esteem culture,
Mhm.
which it gave me something.
Sure.
It was a step up on what came before, but it does have a shadow side, and it's writing a blank check for anxiety and
Yes.
self-preoccupation.
So I want to quote you to yourself from your book. This
Oh God.
is a quote you've got on page 147, and it says, "Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?" I
Oh,
think we are trapped in that ethos right now, where the number of engagements and likes you have on an Instagram post, the amount of followers you have on LinkedIn, the amount of cold emails or whatever you're getting, people are like, well, that's who I should be. The world is telling me I need more of that. I must keep producing and posting things about myself.
yeah.
But who could you be? Who do you want to be? How do you see yourself? Those questions are absent. And I just hear so much of what you're saying reflected in that of like, pause, take inventory. You get to be the decider. In fact, you have all the autonomy you want to
Mm,
create the person you want to be in the world. Let go of all these metrics and testimonials and ratings.
indeed,
It's
indeed.
good stuff.
And at least going back to my first comment about the excitement that I feel about being in the marketplace
Yeah.
in this decade, and specifically in the career
Mhm.
transition, career development marketplace in this decade, is that there are a lot of people asking those questions now. The
Yes.
pandemic has speeded that up enormously.
Yeah.
It's caused us to rethink about what are we doing here? What am I doing in this role, in this job, in this, mold I have created for myself?
Exactly. Well,
It's great.
let's shift into how, because I think people want some actionable tips of how do you showcase your value? How do you be seen for who you are and why that matters in the workplace or for your clients or employer? So I know you and I both have a bunch of tips of it's yes, the reflection is important. Yes, you need to know the theory and basis, but how do you go do this? How do you bring your value out? So let's launch into some tips, John.
Sure. Well, the beginning of the book is about stopping the habit of
Mm,
self-assessment. We it has really become a habit,
interesting.
and obviously magazines and all kinds of online media build on this. Assess yourself in terms of it's again part of this self-esteem. How am I doing? Preoccupation, and instead of all this self-evaluation, to break that habit and to look at usefulness instead. So,
Mm,
what does that mean in practice?
yeah.
If you're at the end of a meeting or the end of a 30-minute call with a client or a new boss or whatever, instead of looking for feedback about you, um, explore what was useful rather than feedback about self. The difference is quite substantial.
Sure.
When we switch to how it is that we're valuable rather than how valuable we are, that changes just about every conversation we ever have,
Mhm.
both with clients, with colleagues, in teams, in networking environments, at conferences, events. Like, literally every conversation changes when we start thinking about how we are valuable
Yeah.
rather than how valuable we are.
I like that shift because it's taking sort of the like, it's not personal. It's about what you're providing and how you're bringing together your unique traits, and that was helping the company or the project create whatever outcome.
Exactly. It's about them. It's not about us.
Nice.
How am I coming across is again, me in the mirror, if you like. What was useful is a question about the world, and how did I contribute to that?
I
And
like that.
it frees up people to have conversations that they simply never have before.
That was
One of the
great.
immediate shifts I see in my coaching work when people start doing that, and one of the ways I know as a coach that they're doing it, is they simply have more exploratory conversations
Ooh.
because they're free to have those
Mm.
exploratory conversations. They're no longer shackled to their own credibility and their own fears
There you
about
go.
how they are coming across.
That's great. So that was tip number one. And again, if people want to go deeper into this, go into John's book, The Self-Worth Safari, because he has so much information on this. But tip number one is about stop all the self-evaluation, show usefulness. Let's shift into another tip, John.
Well, building on that, and I think you will relate to this, Sarah Beth.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is get really clear about your introduction. You really should not have to think about the first sentence of your
No.
introduction. If you've done any kind of professional identity work, if you have been following any of us in what we've been saying so far, then it should be showing up in a very clear first sentence at the top of your LinkedIn profile, in your introduction, consistently, articulating at least the first part. I appreciate we sometimes need to tailor that for where we're going, particularly in your hybrid space where people are often working in multiple contexts.
Completely.
But being very clear about our introduction and making sure that's about who we are and not just what we do.
Yes. So to emphasize that, I've found one of the best tools people use when they're working with me is my hybrid professional identity elevator pitch. And it's a Mad Lib with 3 parts because people needed a framework to just quickly understand how to do a 10-second introduction. You don't get more time than that when you're networking, when you're quickly emailing an intro of yourself to somebody. You've got to be concise and clear, and also share more than just your job title. Because if you're another director of product, head of sales, marketing manager, that doesn't really represent enough about you. You have to be able to showcase, sure, you can use your job title, but give a little bit more about your professional identity. That's not your social and personal identities. It's the frames of who you are in your work. And that, to echo your point, is not just your skills and what you do. So people have never heard of this before. They're like, what are you guys even talking about? And that's why this work matters so much, because we have to train and show people this is the difference. When you explain, hi, I'm Sarah Beth, I'm a creative disruptor because I use my artist, educator, researcher identities to help create radical innovations between people and ideas. That is a different way to introduce myself than just, hi, I'm John. I coach people on self-worth. Like, yeah.
Definitely, very different. And that's why I was very drawn to your work, just the very title of your work, more than my title.
Yeah.
I remember when I first saw that, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Perfect.
It's being
So
more.
next tip, we've just talked about get clear about your introduction. What's next?
The next one could be, might sound a little bit abstract, but stay with me. It gets concrete.
Okay.
So before I got involved in self-worth work, I worked in business coaching for a long time, which was all about raising the value of the work done by professionals. And one of the classic ways in which professionals such as consultants, accountants, lawyers, coaches, trainers, etc., 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 one of the ways that they regularly diminish the value of their work, often being completely unaware of it themselves, is we talk about the content of what we do.
Sure.
We talk about our methodology, our approach to well-being, or our way of doing career development, or the 7 steps to heaven that we follow in training people, or whatever it might be. And there is a time and a place for that, but there's something that absolutely needs to happen first. And what usually I find in 20 years of coaching about 1,500 people when I last counted, is the vast majority of people just skip this step. It's about talking about the context of our work before we talk about the content of our work. So, for example, in a new meeting with a new prospect, maybe, or an interview situation, is exploring the context in which we're going to be using our skills before we start talking about what the skills actually are.
Yes.
A lot of professionals miss that. And again, it ties into the craving for self-esteem, because they believe that they've been taught in some ways that it's their content that dictates their self-esteem. It's their
subject matter expertise.
absolutely. The classic example is the subject matter expert. Indeed. But it's not solely related to them. There's those who will do it in terms of their roles and job titles. There's those who will do it in all kinds of other ways, but they're, again, fall into the trap of talking content before they talk context.
I love that.
And in doing so, they completely miss the place in which the value lies. Because the value of what any of us does, you or I or anyone listening, lies in the context, not in the content. So when we skip it, we're skipping the value space. Thanks to you, I have taken to calling myself a value illuminator. And that's precisely shifting the torch from our content to the context. That's where we discover the opportunities to triple our remuneration, to sell other services, that we discover that the value of what we're doing is considerably higher, not because we've suddenly changed our web design skills, but we've discovered that the impact that they have, or the risks of not following our approach, are much, much bigger than we previously thought.
And I mean, to give a funny example, my mind is going to anytime I ask somebody for advice, or I'm talking with a colleague or a friend, and an example would be like, hey, what should I make for dinner tonight? Like, I have a couple people coming over, and people just start launching into, oh, I love lasagna or this, but they didn't ask about the context of, like, are there any dietary needs? Like, oh, some people can't eat dairy. Like, how many people are you having? What's your budget? Like, that's all the context that's going to influence the information and advice you give. And I think that is a really powerful way to show value, is you're not going to give the right answers if you just start dialing in of, like, your knowledge without framing what is the situation. So that's a really valuable point on how you can give better value.
It has loads of practical implications. How we write proposals is a very, the first page of any proposal should not be about you.
Yes.
The first page of any, when we're doing a presentation, people tend to start with about me, my background. Okay, but can we first maybe just do a context piece, which is, typical issues affecting people right now. Now we do our introduction, because we've set the stage upon which we can bring on the work that we do. We set the stage in the context of those issues.
When I work with people on their introductions, just to come back to that point, if they're going for a certain job or networking reason, understanding the company they're talking to and the person in the company and what they're focused on, doing some of that background research of, like, what are some of their top priorities? Because if you know your professional identity and you know how it's going to connect with them, you build that bridge and you lay the landscape, and then you say, and here's how I fit into it, and here's what I offer that resonates and is going to build more opportunity for them, which makes you sound super intelligent and attractive to them. So let's keep going. I know we've got a couple more to share. So how to help people show their value at work so that they're really seen?
Well, the next point would probably be related, actually, but it's to do with the specifics of a review, whether that's a client review or a review of performance or a review with your boss, formal or informal, as the case may be. Preparing for these things, I know, gives people a lot of angst. By the way, both sides of the table, having worked on both sides, I've learned that both parties dread the annual review. It's not more popular with one than the other. If you're getting ready for a review of any kind, then what's important is to gather examples of how you are valuable, context, rather than how valuable you were, content. Again, it's the same point, but it's and again, we're back to the underlying psychology here of self-esteem versus self-worth. The self-esteem person wants their boss or their client to give them lots of nice adjectives. The self-worth person doesn't need that. They're okay already. What they want to hear about is how their work was impactful,
Mm.
what difference it made to the sales team, what difference, how it could have been more impactful for the operations team.
I love
Um, they're quite comfortable exploring that because
that.
their
Mm.
focus is on how they were valuable
Mm.
rather than how valuable they are.
There's such a nuance there. And even as I hear it out loud, I'm like, I have to really sit and hold on to
Mm,
that phrase to unpack it more. But I think a review is a great sort of case study moment. Even if you're sort of imagining being in one, it can help you reflect on, yeah, how do I talk about myself in a review? How am I talking about value? And what were the projects? And why am I even bringing these projects up? Like, great, you got more registrations or more sales or more collaborations. But what did that really do? Why did that matter? Why is that important for you to share? Why are you focused on that? Is that a metric your company set? Or is that something you're proud of? Did it have deep, lasting impact? And how do you know?
absolutely. Great question. My favorite value question. There's two slight variants, but they're mainly variants in tone of voice. The first is, why was that important?
Yes.
Which can be asked in all kinds of ways. Why exactly was that important? Or sometimes, what is it about that was
Yes.
important?
Yes.
That's the context, that's the value, that's self-worth in action.
Well, you're also making me reflect on a client I worked with. She was struggling. She, had a formal job title of being a UX designer, but she didn't feel seen. She's like, my boss doesn't get me. My colleagues don't understand me. I know I'm bringing more to this job. I know I have a unique way I'm doing this, but I cannot explain it. So we really worked on that with her. And she was able to have a better conversation with her boss when she was going through a review of like, here's what I'm really doing in this role. Here's the different ways my professional identity is coming through that you don't see, but she could finally articulate and convey that. And it changed the conversation because it changed the focus from, well, this is your job title and this is the role you were given, to what is she actually doing in that job to be successful and to help that company move forward. And then they came up with a better game plan and, professional direction for her. So there's a lot of that like internal analysis before you can externally communicate it that people don't know how to do.
Very true. Very true.
Let's keep moving forward, John. We've got
Well,
a couple more.
you've given me the perfect segue
Okay.
to the what will probably be the final one, watching the clock, and that is just to connect everything to your professional identity, good
Yeah.
or bad, whatever is happening, ups and downs, whatever it might be. Because sometimes today's downs become the most precious asset we have for the next piece of work we're going to do, or for the example we're going to give at the next interview. Because the examples of how things went wrong can be just as valuable to support our approach and to support our professional identity as the things that went right.
Yeah.
Therefore, I would say, in summary, connect everything to your professional identity. That is your flag in the marketplace. That's what you stand for in the marketplace.
So I want to add a caveat to that because people have multiple professional identities, at least the people you and I meet. And I want people to focus on the professional identities that matter the most to them. So if you connect everything to your professional identities, but some of the things you do, you don't love doing, they don't light you up. It's the work you do because it has to get done. But it's like, I don't want people to know me as a spreadsheet analyst. I want to be known for this creative disruptor side. So connect things back to your professional identity that are your best professional identities, the ones you do want to be known for, the ones that are your greatest areas of expertise, and I call them your primary ones. And
True.
people don't even know they have primary and non-primary identities.
Yeah. And even then, though, on Friday, I have to do my boring tasks. I organize my week to do all the boring stuff on Friday. So that's the admin, that's the accounting, that's the spreadsheets, that's catching up on the emails. It's all the other things I just got to face during the week. It gets it out of the way for the weekend. And one of the things that helps me is when I remember, why am I doing this? Right? So I'm going to sit down and balance a rather boring spreadsheet. Why am I doing this? Okay, it's part of illuminating the value for X, whatever it might be. Okay, I can do it now. I can do the most menial, boring task in the world, even things that don't play to my talents. I can do them as long as I can connect them to why I'm doing them. So it's the reality is most of us probably have some crud tasks to do every week that we
Yeah.
we
That's
just
part of work.
So I find that even there, or in deciding not to do them because they do not add value, and that happens too. Last Friday, I chose not to respond to 3 different people's emails because I felt we were getting into a debate that was leading nowhere.
Yeah,
It was only serving me being right.
sure.
That is not something the universe needs right now. So I just dropped it. Dropped all 3
Yeah.
of them. And I just deleted 3 emails from my inbox because I did not want them shadowing the weekend.
It didn't reflect your self-worth, John.
It certainly did not reflect myself. No.
Well, this has been fabulous. One final kind of cherry on top of the cake I want to add is for people not to fall into traps of saying, I wear a lot of hats, I'm a jack of all trades, when they're trying to share the value of how they're seen and what they want to be known for in their work. Because if you're not using clear language, if you're not being specific, and if you don't know who you are and why you do what you cannot convey value, period. So the starting blocks of a lot of this is that internal work, getting to know yourself before you can even do the 5 or 6 tips that we outlined today. I think there is a little bit of a process of you need to know you, and then you can talk about your value. John, this has been a fabulous discussion. You and I are doing a webinar together. I think it's March 2nd. So follow John on LinkedIn if you want to be a part of that. We're going to go much deeper into professional identity and value and worth. Fabulous webinar coming up. And then, John, how can people find you if they want to follow you?
Well, selfworthacademy.com is the usual starting point. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, as well. Well, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn.
We're on LinkedIn.
Fully common, easy to find. Yeah, I do look forward to continuing the conversation. I'm an endless student of these topics. I'm learning all the time and look forward to hearing from anybody who's listening.
Yeah, John has amazing tools, programs, and his book, of course. Likewise, I'm at morethanmytitle.com if people are curious about this. Both John and I have very similar interests, but we are bringing our own sort of unique way of supporting people. And so I'd say visit both websites to get the full range of resources around professional identity, self-worth, and showing your hybrid identity in the workforce. John, I can't thank you enough. It is always a pleasure to be able to do things with you, talk, share. I learned from you a ton. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sarah Beth. Time flies. Yep.
Bye, everybody.